Hello my friends, this is Dr. M supporting your journey with intermediate microeconomics, and today you are for a treat, actually for today and maybe another couple of video sessions. We are going to cover homothetic preferences. Homothetic preferences is really widely used and applicable concept, and you will definitely find that very beneficial and useful for yourself. By this time, we have covered a lot of ground. We already know what substitution and income effects are, that they are a part of the total effect. Whenever price is changing, all living organisms are implicitly and explicitly engaged in analysis that results in substitution and income effect. So this is very critical. And now we're going to get some exciting applications. And let me just, for the sake of review, cover a couple of things. And number one is opportunity set. We talked about at excruciating detail that whenever person is facing budget constraint and its own preferences, there are always better options and there are always worse options. And the budget constraint with its slope represents what the rest of the world is willing to trade with you. If you recall from the previous presentation, the slope of the budget constraint is the ratio of prices. So let me go to my notepad here, and I will quickly show you why this is so important. When you are looking at maximizing utility function with two choice variables, x1 and x2, essentially you are looking at the budget constraint, and this budget constraint is income divided by price for x1, and right here income divided price of x2. This has all been covered in excruciating detail, and the slope is rise over run. So when you take rise divided by the run, you get minus sign, don't forget, and then price of x1 divided by price of x2. So this is the ratio of prices, indicating that when you go to the marketplace, you observe the prices. And prices is the message that the rest of the world is trying to communicate to you at what rate the rest of the world is willing to trade x2 for x1. That's what the budget constraint is all about. It shows you the trading off opportunities of x1 versus x2. And when you go to the marketplace, you go to buy milk, you go to buy bread, and you see different prices, it's the signal that you receive what others willing to trade and at what rate. Now, of course, when you go to the marketplace, you go with your own set of preferences. For instance, I love coconut milk, but it doesn't mean that you may like it as well. So when you go to the marketplace, you go with your set of preferences. And the set of preferences is the ratio of marginal utilities, and it has to be also negative because there's a trade-off. You must give up x1 in favor of x2 and vice versa. That's why it has to have a negative sign. Now, this ratio indicates the following. Marginal utility of x1 shows you how much you are enjoying x1 at the margin. Marginal utility of x2 shows you how much you are enjoying x2 at the margin. And the ratio shows you at what rate you are willing to trade enjoyment of x1 for enjoyment of x2. Your level of happiness is the point of tangency at point A. Point of tangency where the slope of the budget constraint, what the rest of the world is willing to trade with you, and your preferences match perfectly. That's when you find the happiness. Otherwise, it's a conflict. You may go to the marketplace, you see prices and they seem to be too high for you, or maybe prices that seem to be too low for you, and in this case you just grab and there's not enough to grab of this product or service. So this conflict is resolved at point A, at tangency point. All right, so now going back to our original slide, we are looking at the preferences. I'm paving the way to homothetic preferences, my friends. So I hope you are staying with me. This is all review. We have done this before, so nothing radically new. So what you see in front of you is good y versus good x. And you see that indifference curves A, B, C, and D. The indifference curve D is the most desirable but not attainable because it's too far away from the budget constraint. So thus, you can conclude that the best place for this person, for this consumer to be, is at point C, because it's the highest level of utility while you are respecting the budget constraint. All right, so this is going to be very important for us to look at some difficult problems in applications. Now, here's another piece of theory that we must review real quick before we jump into applications. Opportunity set. Everyone, as long as you are living and breathing, you have opportunity set. Sometimes it expands, often due to idiosyncratic events that are beyond your control, due to exogenous variables. Maybe it's a seasonal issue, sunshine, maybe it's a sickness of some sort. So if you get sick, your opportunity set shrinks because it constrains you from enjoying what you could enjoy if you were healthy. So in this case, you are looking at different options. Look at two indifference curves that are illustrated in front of you, and there are point 1, 2, and 3. All 3 points lie on the same budget constraint. Are they equally desirable? The answer is no, because point 3 is the best since it lies on the higher level of utility. And that's the tangency point from the previous graph. It represents point A, where the slope of the preferences indicating the rate at which you are willing to trade y for x is identical to the slope of the budget constraint, which is what the rest of the world is willing to trade with you. All right, enough of this, and now we can move towards homothetic preferences. But please be advised that you want to understand the theory, how to put it on the graph when opportunity set expands and when it contracts, because it entails what living organisms, including people, do in terms of choices. All right, so now we have it all squared away in details. We can now move towards homothetic preferences. Let me start with the definition, and then I will go through some examples. Definition of homothetic preferences is this. A homothetic person buys decreasing amount of everything as budget constraint contrasting or shrinks, and homothetic person buys increasing amount of everything as budget constraint expands. Let me quickly draw this on a notepad so you guys have a chance to do it by hand if you have to. So I'm looking at two goods. In this case, we are maximizing utility with good Y and good X. And we are declaring the direction of preferences is northeast. So far, I have revealed nothing new to you. That's all been known to you. So one person may have this type of preference, the other person may have this type of preference, but the direction of the preference is the same, northeast. So if you were to draw the indifference curve, or indifference map, since it has more than one curve, and you will look at the slope, you see that the slope stays the same. And because slope stays the same in those consumption bundles, you can do the same for the second person. Because the slope stays the same, this person exhibiting homothetic preferences. So, as you increase your budget constraint outward, and those slopes represent the budget constraint, and your ratio of X in relationship to Y does not change, you're homothetic. So what I want to do now is to go back to our slide and do some examples with you so we can make sure that you get this theory. All right, so we have these homothetic preferences that are represented by the same ratios when you take rise over run, calculating the budget constraint tangent to indifference curve at each level as you expand or become larger, moving into the direction of northeast. Let me give you examples. Let's suppose that you have a budget, and a part of your budget was to buy some food, to spend some money on your housing, and spend some money on your car. If you receive a raise in your compensation, let's say by $10,000 a year, you will spend the same proportion of your budget on your housing, on your food, and on your transportation. And as your income changes, but your proportion of expenditures on each item stays the same, you have homothetic preferences. That's what it is. All right. So let me start with the challenge here. According to economic theory, the further you move away from the point of origin, the better you're off. And that means the further you move to the direction of northeast, the better you're off. That should hold true when people receive inheritance, large inheritance, and it also should hold true when people win the lottery, because winning the lottery expands your budget constraints suddenly to a very great extent, and inheritance does something similar. And yet, case after case, we find that people who win the lottery engage at risk behavioral choices. Let's talk about Jack. Jack won the lottery it was the largest lottery in history. I think it was over $300 million. And before he won the lottery, he was fairly poor. And once he wins the lottery, suddenly he experiences enormous amount of wealth. What happened? After winning the lottery, he gave away about $15 million to charity. Then he bought a very nice property in terms of housing. He bought multiple cars of his dreams. He supported some of his relatives. And yet, the outcome was shocking from this event. His marriage of 44 years ended up in a very bitter divorce. Some of his loved ones, under his support, started dying from drug overdose. His own behavior in terms of handling himself in the society started to get to the point where he despised himself. He was sued in the court of law over 400 times. And the list of those dreadful events goes on and on. Why? The lottery that was supposed to make him happy, according to economic theory, moving him further and further away from the origin into the direction of northeast, brought a lot of misery. To the point where he comes to the national television and he states, "I wish I would never won this lottery ticket." I want to answer this question and offer you some insight. I also would like to answer some other questions related to family economics. And in family economics, you can review consumption of man and a woman. We're talking about traditional family, of course. Consumption between man and a woman that decide to form family. So I would like to start with a declaration. Based on this graph in front of you, you can see that man and woman are not the same based on their preferences. So let me drive this point home before concluding this presentation. Essentially, what we are looking at is a series of consumption. Let's call it X1 and X2. And what we are saying that here's the direction of preference for women, and here is direction of preference for men. It is fair to say that each person is very individually different, and women and men are clearly different. The difference is measured by the distance between those preferences. The further they are apart, the larger is the space between them. Because each of this preference indicates how much each of them likes x1 in relationship to x2. And they both exhibit different type of preferences. The larger the distance between them, the more different they are in terms of their preferences. So let's go back to the slide. And what we can just, before we jump back to the slide, I want to say that here is the budget constraint. Once they both decide to form family, then they will enjoy x1 and x2 at their own choosing individually. Let me run this point home. The difference between man and woman is very evident by neurological studies. Neurological system is only around 60% the same for man versus woman. Man and woman perceive fear differently. Man and woman perceive other events in life differently. Biologically speaking, women are still better off giving birth than men. And they are still better off breastfeeding than men. So I hope there is no doubt that there is a significant difference between man and a woman, whether it's biologically, psychologically, neurologically, or otherwise. They are different. So, and as the budget constraint is going to shift in either direction, interesting things happen. Because they cannot maximize their own utility while forming the family at the point of tangency, and that's where each of them wants to be. Somebody has to give up. And if man is going to give up his utility and meet her at her point of tangency, then this is how much he has to pay for it. It could be that she will give up something as well, and they may meet in the middle. That could be the case too. So, but you see the dynamic that is taking place. Now we are ready to go back to the slide, and I will just set it up for you, and then we come back to address this again. So you see the orange line in the middle between man and woman. That's the line that shows where man is compromising something for the sake of the family, and woman is compromising something for the sake of the family, and they meet in the middle in order to maximize the welfare of the family. In this case, you have to recognize one thing, and I'm about to finish this presentation. To form a family is actually challenging economic theory. And here's why. Because man wants to be higher and is able to be higher without being married, moving into the direction of northeast, maximizing his own utility, and woman can attain high utility. Marriage demands for them to give up this utility and move back to the point of origin. So I want you to look at this graph more, and we'll come back next time. Meanwhile, have a healthy day.